So the Sherlock Holmes stories we'll be reading today is A Study in Scarlet. Chapter 1. Mr. Sherlock Holmes. In the year 1878, I took my degree of Doctor of Medicine of the University of London and proceeded to Netley to go through the course prescribed for surgeons in the army. Having completed my studies there, I was duly attached to the 5th Northumberland Fusilier as assistant sergeant. The regiment was stationed in India at the time, and before I could join in, the Second Afghan War had broken out. On landing at Bombay, I learned that my corps had advanced through the passes and was already deep in the enemy's country. I followed, however, with many other officers who were in the same situation as myself, and succeeded in reaching Kandahar in safety, where I found my regiment and at once entered upon my new duties. The campaign brought honor and promotion to many, but for me it had nothing but misfortune and disaster. I was removed from my brigade and attached to the Berkshires, whom I served at the fatal battle of Maiwand. There I was struck on the shoulder by a jazzle bullet, which shattered the bone and grazed the subclavian artery. I should have fallen into the hands of the murderous Gazes, but had it not been for the devotion and courage shown by Murray, my orderly, who threw me across a pack horse and succeeded in bringing me safely to the British lines. Worn from pain and weak from the prolonged hardships which I had undergone, I was removed with a great train of wounded sufferers to the base hospital at Peshawar. Here I rallied and had already improved so much as to be able to walk about the ward, and even to bask a little upon the veranda, when I was struck down by eccentric fever, that curse of our Indian possessions. For months my life was despaired of, and when at least I came to myself and became convalescent, I was too weak. Okay, bro, what is with these words? I do not know how I say this word. Emaciated. Oh. Okay. Emaciated. That a medical board determined that not a day should be lost in sending me back to England. I was dispatched accordingly in the troop ship Orontes and landed a month later on Portsmouth jetty with my health irreparably ruined, but with permission from a parental government to spend the next 9 months in attempting to improve it. I had neither kith nor kin in England, and was therefore as free as air, or as free as an income of 11 shillings and 6 pence a day will permit a man to be. Under such circumstances, I naturally gravitated to London, that great cesspool into which all the loungers and idlers of the empire are irreparably drained. Here I stayed for some time at a private hotel in the Strand, leading a comfortless, meaningless existence, and spending such money as I had considerably more freely than I ought. So alarming did the state of my finances become that I soon realized that I must either leave the metropolis or rusticate somewhere in the country, or that I must make a complete alteration in my style of living. Choosing the latter alternative, I began by making up my mind to leave the hotel and to take up my quarters in some less pretentious and less expensive domicile. On the very day that I had come to this conclusion, I was standing at the Crichton bar when someone tapped me on the shoulder, and turning around, I recognized young Stamford, who had been a dresser under me at the Barts. The sight of a friendly face in the great wilderness of London is a pleasant thing indeed to a lonely man. In all days, Stamford had never been a particular crony of mine, but now I hailed him with enthusiasm, and he in his turn appeared to be delighted to see me. In the exuberance of my joy, I asked him to lunch with me at the Holborn, and we started off together in a hansom. "Whatever have you been doing with yourself, Watson?" he asked in undisguised wonder, as we rattled through the crowded London streets. "You're as thin as a lath and as brown as a nut." I gave him a short sketch of my adventures, and had hardly concluded it by the time that we reached our destination. "Poor devil," he said, commiseratingly, as we had listened to my misfortunes. "What are you up to now?" "Looking for lodgings," I answered, trying to solve the problem as to whether it is possible to get comfortable room at a reasonable price. "Ghost, hi, how are you?" Right now we are reading Sherlock Holmes, and obviously I'm struggling with words. Yes, for those who don't know, I do have a Discord. Join us at the Palace of Cyberspace. "That's a strange thing," remarked my companion. "You are the second man today that has used that expression to me." "And who was the first?" I asked. "A fellow who is working at the chemical laboratory up at the hospital. He was bemoaning himself this morning because he could not get someone to go house with him in some nice rooms which he had found and which were too much for his purse." "By Job," I cried, "if he really wants someone to share the rooms and the expense, I am the very man for him. I should prefer having a partner to be alone." Young Stamford looked rather strangely at me over his wine glass. "You don't know Sherlock Holmes yet," he said. "Perhaps you would not care for him as a constant companion." "Why, what is there against him?" "Oh, I didn't say there was anything against him. He is a little queer in his ideals, and enthusiast in some branches of science. As far as I know, he is a decent fellow enough. A medical student, I suppose, said I. Now, I have no idea what he intends to do it for. I believe he is well up in anatomy, and he is a first-class chemist, but as far as I know, he has never taken out any systematic medical classes. His studies are very desultory and eccentric, but he has amassed a lot of out-of-the-way knowledge, which would astonish his professors. Did you never ask him what he was going in for? I asked. No, he is not a man that is easy to draw out. Oh, he can't be commutative enough when the fancy seizes him. I should like to meet him, I said, if I am to lounge with someone. I should prefer a man of studious and quiet habits. I am not strong enough yet to stand much noise or excitement. I had enough of both in Afghanistan to last me for the remainder of my natural existence. How could I meet this friend of yours? He is sure to be at the laboratory, returned my companion. He either avoids the place for weeks, or else he works there from morning till night. If you like, we will drive around together after lunch on. Certainly, I answered, and the conversation drifted away into other channels. As we made our way to the hospital after leaving the Hellborn, Stanford gave me a few more particulars about the gentleman whom I proposed to take as a fellow lodger. You mustn't blame me if you don't get on with him, he said. I know nothing more of him than I have learned from meeting him occasionally in the laboratory. You proposed this arrangement, so you must not hold me responsible. If we don't get on it well, be easy to part company, I answered. It seems to me, Stanford, I added, looking hard at my companion, that you have some reason for washing your hands of the matter. Is this fellow's temper so formidable, or what is it? Don't be mealy-mouthed about it. It is not easy to express the inexpressible, he answered with a laugh. Holmes is a little too scientific for my taste. It approaches to cold-bloodedness. I could imagine his giving a friend a little pinch of the latest vegetable alkaloid, not out of malevolence, you understand, but simply out of the spirit of inquiry in order to have an accurate idea of the effects. To do him justice, I think that he would take in himself with the same readiness he appears to have a passion for definite and exact knowledge. Very right, too. Yes, but it may be pushed to excess. When it comes to beating the subject in the dissecting room with a stick, it is certainly taking a rather bizarre shape. Beating the subjects? Yes, to identify how far bruises may be produced after death. I saw him at it with my own eyes. And yet you say he is not a medical student? No, heavens knows what the objects of his studies are. But here we are, and you must form your own impressions about him. As he spoke, we turned down a narrow lane and passed through a small side door which opened into a wing of the great hospital. It was familiar ground to me, and I needed no guiding as we ascended the bleak stone staircase and made our way down the long corridor with its vista of whitewashed walls and dune-colored doors. Near the farther end, a low arched passage reached away from it and led to the chemical laboratory. This was a lofty chamber, lined and littered with countless bottles. Broad, low tables were scattered about, which bristled with retorts, test tubes, and little Bunsen's lamps with their blue flickering flames. There was only one student in the room, who was bending over a distinct table, absorbed in his work. At the sound of our steps, he glanced round and sprung to his feet with a cry of pleasure. "I found it! I found it!" he shouted to my companion, running towards us with a test tube in his hand. "I have found a reagent which is precipitated by what is this word? No. That doesn't help me very much. Hemoglobin. And by nothing else. Had he discovered a gold mine, greater delay could not have shown upon his features. "Dr. Watson, Mr. Sherlock Holmes," said Stanford, introducing us. "How are you?" he said cordially, gripping my hand with a strength for which I should hardly have given him credit. "You have been in Afghanistan, I perceive." "How on earth did you know that?" I asked in astoundment. "Never mind," said he, chuckling to himself. "The question now is about hemoglobin. No doubt you see the significance of this discovery of mine." "It is interesting, chemically, no doubt," I answered, "but practically, why, man, it is the most practical medical legal discovery for years. Don't you see that it gives us an infallible test for bloodstains? Come over here now." He seized me by the coat sleeve in his eagerness and drew me over the table at which he had been working. "Let us have some fresh blood," he said, digging a long barred king into his finger, and drawing off the resulting drops of blood in a chemical pipette. Now, I add this small quantity of blood to a liter of water. You perceive that the resulting mixture has the appearance of pure water. The proportion of blood cannot be more than 1 in a million, I have no doubt. However, that we shall be able to obtain the characteristic reaction." As he spoke, he threw into the vessel a few white crystals, and then added some drops of transparent fluid. In an instant, his contents assumed a dull mahogany color, and a brownish dust was precipitated to the bottom of the glass jar. "Ha ha!" he cried, clapping his hands and looking as delighted as a child with a new toy. "What do you think of that?" "It seems to be a very delicate test," I remarked. "Beautiful, beautiful. The old test was very clumsy and uncertain. So is the microscope examination for blood corpuscle, I think. The latter is violet if the stains are a few hours old. Now, this appears to act as well, rather the blood is old or new. Had this test been invented, there are hundreds of men now walking the earth who would long ago have paid the penalty of their crimes. Indeed, I murmured. Criminal cases are continually hinging upon that one point. A man is suspected of a crime months, perhaps, after it has been committed. His linen or cloths are examined, and brownish stains discovered upon them. Are they blood stains, or mud stains, or rust stains, or fruit stains? Or what are they? That is a question which has puzzled many. An expert? And why? Because there was no reliable test. Now we have the Sherlock Holmes test, and there will no longer be any difficulty. His eyes fairly glittery as he spoke, and he put his hand over his heart and bowed as if to some applauding crowd conjoined up by his imagination. You are to be congratulated, I remarked, considerably surprised at his enthusiasm. There was the case of von Bischoff at Frankfurt last year. He would certainly have been hung had this test been in existence. And there was the Mason of Bradford, and the notorious Muller, and Lee Theory of Montpellier, and Samson of New Orleans. I could name a score of cases in which it would have been deceived. You seem to be walking calendar of crime, said Stanford with a laugh. You might start a paper on these lines. Call it the police news of the past. Very interesting reading. It might be made too, remarked Sherlock Holmes, sticking a small piece of plaster over the prick on his finger. I have to be careful, he continued, turning to me with a smile, for I dabble with poisons a good deal. He held out his hand as he spoke, and I noticed that it was all muddled over with similar pieces of plastic and discolored with strong acids. We come here on business, said Stanford, sitting down on a high three-legged stool and pushing another one in my direction with his foot. My friend here wants to take diggings, and as you were complaining that you could get no one to go halves with you, I thought that I had better bring you together. Sherlock Holmes seemed delighted at the idea of sharing his rooms with me. I had my eyes on a suite in Baker Street, he said, which would suit us down to the ground. You don't mind the smell of strong tobacco, I hope. I always smoke ships myself, I answered. That's good enough. I generally have chemicals about and occasionally do experiments. Would that annoy you? By no means. Let me see. What are my other shortcomings? I get in the dumps at times, and I don't open my mouth for days on end. You must not think I am sulky when I do that. Just let me alone, and I'll soon be right. What have you to confess now? It's just as well for two fellows to know the worst of one another before they begin to live together. I laughed at his cross-examination. I keep a bullpup, I said, and I object to rows because my nerves are shaken, and I get up at all sorts of ungodly hours, and I am extremely lazy. I have another set of vices when I'm well, but those are the practical ones at the present. Do you include violin playing in your category of rows? He asked anxiously. Depends on the player, I answered. A well-played violin is a treat for the gods, and a badly played one. Oh, that's all right, he cried with a merry laugh. I think we may consider the thing as settled. That is, if the rooms are agreeable to you. When shall we see them? Call for me here at noon tomorrow, and we'll go together and settle everything, he answered. All right, noon exactly, said I, shaking his hand. We left him working among his chemicals, and we walked together towards my hotel. By the way, I accidentally stopping and turning upon Stanford. How the deuce did he know that I had come from Afghanistan? My companion smiled in a chemical smile. That's just his little particularity, he said. A good many people have wanted to know how he finds things out. Oh, a mystery it is, I cried, rubbing my hands. This is very piquant. I am much obliged to you for bringing us together. The proper study of mankind is man. You know. You must study him then, Stanford said, as he bade me goodbye. You'll find him a nutty problem, though. I'll wager he learns more about you than you about him. Goodbye. Goodbye, I answered, and strolling to my hotel, considerably interested in my new acquaintance. Chapter 2. The Science of Deduction. We met next day, as he had arranged and expected the rooms at number 221B Baker Street, on which he had spoken at our meeting. They consisted of a couple of comfortable bedrooms and a single large, airy sitting room, cheerfully furnished and illuminated by 2 broad windows. So desirable in every way were the apartments, and so moderated did the terms seem when divided between us, that the bargain was concluded upon the spot, and we at once entered into possession. That very evening, I moved my things round from the hotel, and on the following morning, Sherlock Holmes followed me with several boxes and portmanteaus. For a day or two, we were busily employed in unpacking and laying out our property to the best advantage. That done, we gradually began to settle down and to accommodate ourselves to our new surroundings. Holmes was certainly not a difficult man to live with. He was quiet in his ways, and his habits were regular, and it was rare for him to be up after 10 at night. And he had an invariable breakfast and gone out before I rose in the morning. Sometimes he spent his days at the chemical laboratory, sometimes in the dissecting room, and occasionally in long walks, which appeared to take him into the lowest portions of the city. Holmes was certainly not a difficult man to live with. He was quiet in his ways, and his habits were regular. It was rare for him to be up after 10 at night, and he had invariable breakfast and gone out before I rose in the morning. Sometimes he spent his days at the chemical laboratory, sometimes in the dissecting room, and occasionally long walks, which appeared to take him into the lower portions of the city. Nothing could exceed his energy when the working fit was upon him. But now and again a reaction would seize him, and for days on end he would lie upon the sofa in the sitting room, hardly uttering a word or moving a muscle from morning to night. On these occasions I have noticed such a dreamy, vacant expression in his eyes that I might have suspected him of being addicted to the use of some narcotic, had not the temperance and cleanliness of his whole life forbidden such a notion. As the weeks went by, my interest in him and my curiosity as to his aims in life gradually deepened and increased. His very person and appearance were such as to strike the attention of the most casual observer. In height, he was rather over 6 feet, and so excessively lean that he seems to be considerably tall. His eyes were sharp and piercing, save during those intervals of torpor to which I have alluded. And his thin, hawk-like nose gave his whole expression an air of alertness and decision. His chin, too, had the prominence and squareness which mark the man of determination. His hands were invariably blotted with ink and stained with chemicals, yet he was possessed of extraordinarily delicacy of touch, as I frequently had occasion to observe when I watched him manipulate his philosophical instruments. The reader may set me down as a hopeless busybody when I confess how much this man stimulated my curiosity, and how often I am devoured to break through the reticence which he showed on all that concerned himself. Before pronouncing judgment, however, be it remembered how objectless was my life, and how little there was to engage my attention. My health forbade me from venturing out unless the weather was exceptionally gentle, and I had no friend who would call upon me and break the monotony of my daily existence. Upon these circumstances, I eagerly hailed the little mystery which hung around my companion, and spent much of my time in endeavoring to unravel it. He was not studying medicine. He had himself, in reply to a question, confirmed Stanford's opinion in that point. Neither did he appear to have pursued any course of reading which might fit him for a degree in science or any other recognized portal which would give him an entrance into the learned world. Yet his zeal for certain studies was remarkable, and within the eccentric limits his knowledge was so extraordinarily ample and minute that his observations had fairly astounded me. Surely no man would work so hard or attain such precise information unless he had some definite end in view. The solitary readers are seldom remarkable for the exactness of their learning. No man burdens his mind with small matters unless he has some very good reason for doing so. His ignorance was as remarkable as his knowledge of contemporary literature, philosophy, and politics. He appeared to know next to nothing. Upon my quoting Thomas Carlyle, he inquired in a needless way he might be and what he had done. My surprise reached a climax, however, when I found, incidentally, that he was ignorant of the coordination theory and of the composition of the solar system. That any civilized human in this 19th century should not be aware that the Earth traveled round the sun appeared to be, to me, such an extraordinary fact that I had hardly realized it. "You appear to be astonished," he said, smiling at my expression of surprise. "Not that I do know it. I shall do my best to forget it." "To forget it?" "You see," he explained, "I consider that a man's brain originally is like little empty attic, and you have to stock it with such furniture as you can. A fool takes in all the lumber of every sort that he comes across, so that the knowledge which be useful to him gets crowded out, or at best is jumbled up with a lot of other things, so that he has difficulty in laying his hands upon it. Now, the skillful workman is very clever indeed. As to what he takes into his brain attic, he will have nothing but the tools which may help him in doing his work, but of these he has a large assortment, and all in the most perfect order. It is a mistake to think that the little room has elastic walls. It can distend to any extent. Depend upon it, there comes a time for every addition of knowledge you forget something that you knew before. It is of the highest importance, therefore, not to have useless facts elbowing out the useful ones." "But the solar system," I protested. "What the use is it to me?" he interrupted impatiently. "You say that we go round the sun. If we went round the moon, it would not make a penny's worth of difference to me or to my work." I was on the point of asking him what that work might be, but something in his manner showed me that the question would be an unwelcomed one. I pondered over our short conversation, however, and devoured to draw my deduction from it. He said that he would acquire no knowledge which did not bear upon his object. Therefore, all knowledge which he possessed was such as would be useful to him. Enumerate in my own mind all the various points upon which he had shown me that he was exceptionally well informed. I even took a pencil and jotted them down. I could not help smiling at the document when I had completed it. It ran in this way: Sherlock Holmes, his limits. 1. Knowledge of literature, nil. 2. Knowledge of philosophy, nil. 3. Knowledge of astronomy, nil. 4. Knowledge of politics, feeble. 5. Knowledge of botany, variable. Well, up in belladonna, opium, and poisons generally, knows nothing of practical gardening. 6. Knowledge of geology, practical but limited, tells at a glance different soils from each other. After walks has shown me splashes upon of his trousers and told me by their color and consistence in what part of London he had received them. 7. Knowledge of chemistry, profound. 8. Knowledge of anatomy. My bad. Accurate but unsystematic. 9. Knowledge of sensational literature. It meant he appears to know every detail of every horror perpetrated in the century. 10. Plays the violin well. 11. Is an expert single-stick player, boxer, and swordsman. 12. Has a good practical knowledge of British law. When I had got so far in my list, I threw it onto the fire in despair. If I can only find what the fellow is driving at by reconciling all these accomplishments and discovering a calling which needs them all, I said to myself, I may as well give up the attempt at once. I say that I have alluded above to his powers upon the violin. These were very remarkable, but eccentric as all his other accomplishments, that he could play pieces and different pieces. I knew well, because at my request, he has played me some of Mendelssohn Litters and other favorites. When left to himself, however, he would seldom produce any music or attempt any recognized air. Leaning back in his armchair of an evening, he would close his eyes and scrape carelessly at the fiddle which was thrown across his knee. Sometimes the chords Spanius and Melancholy occasionally they were fantastic and cheerful. Clearly they reflected the thoughts which possessed him, but rather the music aided those thoughts. Or rather, the playing was simply the result of a whim or fancy, was more than I could determine. I might have rebelled against these exasperating solos had it not been that he usually terminated them by playing in quick succession a whole series of my favorite airs as a slight compensation for the trial upon my patience. During the first week or so, we had no callers, and I had begun to think that my companion was as friendless a man as I was myself. Presently, however, I found that he had made acquaintances, and those in the most different classes of society. There was one little shallow, rat-faced, dark-eyed fellow who was introduced to me as Mr. Lesrade, and who came 3 or 4 times in a single week. One morning, a young girl called, fashionably dressed, and stayed for half an hour or more. The same afternoon brought a gray-headed, steedy visitor looking for a Jew pedal, who appeared to me to be much excited, and who was closely followed by a slip-shod elderly woman. On another occasion, an old white-haired gentleman had an interview with my companion, and on another, a railway porter in his velvety uniform. When any of these nondescript individuals put in an appearance, Sherlock Holmes used to beg for the use of the sitting room, and I would retire to my bedroom. He always apologized to me for putting me in this inconvenience. I have to use this room as a place of business, he said, and these people are my clients. Again, I had an opportunity of asking him a point-blank question, and again, my delicacy prevented me from forcing another man to confide in me. I imagined at the time that he had some strong reasons for not alluding to it. But he soon dispelled the idea by coming round to the subject of his own accord. It was upon the 4th of March, as I have good reasons to remember, that I rose somewhat earlier than usual and found that Sherlock Holmes had not yet finished his breakfast. The landlady had become so accustomed to my late habits that my place had not been laid nor my coffee prepared. With the unreasonable petulance of mankind, I rang the bell and gave a curt intimation that I was ready. Then I picked up a magazine from the table and attempted to while away the time with it, while my companion munched silently at his toast. One of the articles had a pencil mark at the heading, and I naturally began to run my eyes through it. Its somewhat ambiguous tide was the Book of Life, and it attempted to show how much an observant man might learn by an accurate, systematic examination of all that came in his way. It struck me as being a remarkable mixture, a shrewdness and absurdity. The reasoning was close and intense, but the deductions appeared to me to be fair. Reasoning was close. Wait, hold on. Did I just skip a line? But the deduction appeared to me to be far-fetched and exaggerated. There we go. The writer claimed by a momentary expression, a twitch of a muscle, or a glance of an eye, to fathom a man's inmost thoughts. Deceit, according to him, was an impossibly in the case of one trained to observe and analysis. His conclusions were as infallible as so many propositions of Euclid. So startling would his results appear to be uninitiated, that until they learned the process by which he had arrived at them, they might well consider him a necromancer. From a drop of water, said the writer, a Gregson could infer the possibility of a Atlantic or a Niagara without having seen or heard of one or the other. So all life is the great chain, the nature of which is known whenever we are shown a single link of it. Like all other arts, the science of deduction and analysis is one which can only be acquired by long and patient study, nor is life long enough to allow any mortal to attain the highest possible perfection in it. Before turning to these morals and mental aspects of the matter which present the greatest difficulties, let the inquirer begin by mastering more elementary problems. Let him, on meeting a fellow mortal, learn at a glance to distinguish the history of the man and the trade or profession to which he belongs. Puerile as such an excuse may seem, is sharpness. The facilities of observation it teaches one where to look and what to look for. By a man's fingernail, by his coat sleeve, by his boots, by his trouser knees, by the calizations on his forefinger and thumb, by his expression, by his shirt cuffs. By each of these things a man's calling is plainly revealed, that all united should fail to enlighten the confident inquirer. In any case, it's almost inconceivable. What ineffable twaddle? I cried, slapping the magazine down on the table. I never read such rubbish in my life. What is it? Asked Sherlock Holmes. Why, this article, I said, pointing at it with my egg spoon. As I sat down to my breakfast, I see that you have read it since you have marked it. I won't deny that it is smartly written. It irritates me, though. It is evidently the theory of some armchair louder who involves all these neat little paradoxes in the succession of his own study. It is not practical. I should like to see him clapped down in a third-class carriage on the underground and asked to give the trade of all his fellow travelers. I would lay 1,000 to 1 against him. You would lose your memory, Holmes remarked calmly. As for the article, I wrote it myself. You? Yes. I have a turn both for observation and for deduction. The theories which I have expressed here, and which appear to you to be so chimerical, are really extremely practical. So practical that I depend upon them for my bread and cheese. And how? I said involuntarily. Well, I have a trade of my own, I suppose. I am the only one in the world. I'm a consulting detective, if you can understand what that is. Here in London, we have lots of government detectives and lots of private ones. When these fellows are at fault, they come to me, and I manage to put them on the right scent. They lay all the evidence before me, and I am generally able, by the help of my knowledge and of the history of crime, to set them straight. There is a strong family resemblance about misdeeds, and if you have all the details of 1,000 at your finger end, it is odd if you can't unravel the 1,001st. Lettre is a well-known detective. He got himself into a fog recently over a forgery case, and that was what brought him here. And these other people, they're mostly sent on by private inquiring agencies. They're all people who are in trouble about something and want a little enlightening. I listen to their stories, they listen to my comments, and then I pocket my fee. But do you mean to say, I said, that without leaving your room, you can unravel some knot which other men can make nothing of? Although they have seen every detail from themselves? Quite so. I had a kind of intuition that way. Now and again, a case turns up which is a little more complex. Then I have to bustle about and see things with my own eyes. You see, I have a lot of special knowledge which I apply to the problem, and which facilitates matters wonderfully. These rules of deduction laid down in that article, which arouse your scorn, are invaluable to me in practical work. Observations with me is second nature. You appeared to be surprised when I told you on our first meeting that you had come from Afghanistan. You were told, no doubt. Nothing of the sorts. I knew you came from Afghanistan. From long habit, the train of thought ran so swiftly through my mind that I arrived at the conclusion without being cautious of intermediate steps. There were such steps, however, the train of reasoning run. Here is a gentleman of a medical type, but with the air of a military man. Clearly any army doctor, then. He has just come from the tropics, for his face is dark, and that is not the natural tint of his skin, for his wrists are fair. He has undergone hardship and sickness, as his haggard face says clearly. His left arm has been injured. He holds it in a stiff and unnatural manner. Where in the chapbooks could an English army doctor have seen such hardships and got his arm wounded? Clearly in Afghanistan. The whole train of thought did not occupy a second. I then remarked that you came from Afghanistan and you were astounded. It is simple enough as you explain it, I said, smiling. You remind me of Edgar Allan Poe's Duncan. I had no idea that such individuals did exist outside of stories. Sherlock Holmes rose and lit his pipe. No doubt you think that you can You are complimenting me in comparing me to Dupin, he observed. Now, in my opinion, Dupin was a very inferior fellow. That trick of his of breaking in on his friend's thoughts with a apropos remark after a quarter of an hour's silence is really very slowly and superficial. He had some analytical genius, no doubt, but he was by no means such a phenomenon as Poe appeared to imagine. Have you read Gabriel's works? I asked. Does Lee Q come up to your ideas of a detective? Sherlock Holmes sniffed sardonically. Lee Q was a miserable bungler, he said, in an angry voice. He had only one thing to recommend him, and that was his energy. That book made me positively ill. The question was how to identify an unknown prisoner. I could have done it in 24 hours. Q took 6 months or so. It might be made a textbook for detectives to teach them what to avoid. I felt a rather indignant at having 2 characters whom I had admired treated in this cavalier style. I walked over to the window and stood looking out into the busy street. This fellow may be very clever, I said to myself, but he is certainly very conceited. There are no crimes and no criminals in these days, he said crestfully. What is the use of having brains in our profession? I know well that I have it in me to make money famous. No man lives or has ever lived who has brought the same amount of study of natural talent to the deduction of crime which I have done. And what is the result? There is no crime to deduct, or at most some bungling villainy with a motive so transparent that even a Scotland Yard official can see through it. I was still annoyed at his bontatious style and conversation. I thought it best to change the topic. I wonder what the fellow is looking for, I asked, pointing to the stalwart, plainly dressed individual who was walking slowly down the other side of the street, looking anxiously at the numbers. He had a large blue envelope in his hand. It was evidently the bearer of a message. You mean the retired sergeant of Marines? Said Sherlock Holmes. Brag bounce, thought I to myself. He knows that I cannot verify his guess. The thought had hardly passed through my mind when the man whom we were watching caught sight of the number on our door and ran rapidly across the roadway. We heard a loud knock, a deep voice below, and heavy steps ascending the stairs. "Toward Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he said, stepping into the room and handing my friend the letter. Here was an opportunity of taking the conceited out of him. He little thought of this, when he made the random shot. May I ask, my lad, I said in the blandest voice, what your trade may be? Commission air, sir, he said gruffly. Uniform away for repairs. And you were, I asked, with the slightest malicious glance at my companion. A sergeant, sir. Royal Marine Light Infantry, sir. No answer? Right, sir. He clicked his heels together and raised his hand in a salute and was gone. Chapter 3. The Lauriston Garden Mystery. I confess that I was considerably startled by this fresh proof of the practical nature of my companion's theories. My respect for his powers of analysis increased wondrously. There still remained some lurking suspicions in my mind, however, that the whole thing was a prearranged episode, intended to dazzle me through what earthly object he could have in taking me in was past my comprehension. When I looked at him, he had finished reading the note, and his eyes had assumed the vacant, lackluster expression which showed mental abstraction. How in the world did you deduct that? I asked. Deduct what? He said. He said petulantly. What? Oh, hold on. Why? That he was a retired sergeant of Marines. I have no time for trifles, he answered brusquely. Then with a smile, excuse my rudeness, you broke the thread of my thoughts, but perhaps it is as well. So you actually were not able to see that the man was a sergeant of Marines? No, indeed. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. Even across the street, I could see a great blue anchor tattoo on the back of the fellow's hand. That smacked of the sea. He had military carriage, however, and regulation side whiskers. There we have the Marines. He was a man with the same amount of self-importance and a certain air of command. You must have observed the way in which he held his head and swung his cane. A steady, respectable middle-aged man, too. On the face of him, all facts which led me to believe that he had been a sergeant. Wonderful. I.e. Ejaculated. Is that actually a saying for saying that he was surprised? Okay, so it's to say something quickly and steadily. Interesting. Commonplace, said Holmes, though I thought from his expression that he was pleased at my evident surprise and admiration. I said just now that there were no criminals. It appears that I am wrong. Look at this. He threw me over the note which the commissioner had brought. Why? I cried as I cast my eyes over. This is terrible. It does seem to be a little out of the common, he remarked calmly. Would you mind reading it to me aloud? This is a letter which I read to him. My dear Mr. Sherlock Holmes, there has been a bad business during the night. At 3, Lauriston Gardens, off the Brixton Road, a man on the Bede saw a light there about 2 in the morning, and as the house was an empty one, suspected that everything was amiss. He found the door open, and in the front room, which is bare of furniture, and discovered the body of a gentleman, well dressed, and having cards in his pocket, bearing the name on a Roach J. Drebber, Cleveland, Ohio, USA. There had been no robbery, nor is there any evidence as to how the man met his death. There was marks of blood in the room, but there was no wound upon his person. We are at a loss as to how he came into the empty house. Indeed, the whole affair is a puzzler. If you can come round to the house any time before 12, you will find me there. I have left everything and statu quo until I hear from you. If you are unable to come, I shall give you fuller details. It would esteem it a great kindness if you would favor me with your opinion. Yours faithfully, Tobias Gregson. Gregson is the smartest of the Scotland Yarders, my friend remarked. He and Lestrade are the pick of a bad lot. They are both quick and energetic, but conventional and shockingly so. They have their knives into one another too. They are as jealous as a pair of professional beauties. There will be some fun over this cave, and they are both put upon the scent. I was amazed at the calm way in which he rippled on. Surely there is not a moment to be lost, I cried. Shall I go and order you a cab? I'm not sure, but rather I shall go. I am the most insurable lazy devil that ever stood in shoe leather, that is, when the fit is on me, for I can be springy enough at times. Why, it is just a chance as you have been longing for. My dear fellow, what does it matter to me? Supposing I unravel the whole matter, you may be sure that Gregson, Lestrade & Co. will pocket all the credit that comes of being an unofficial personage. But he begs you to help him. Yes, he knows that I am his superior. It acknowledges me and acknowledges it to me, but he will cut his tongue out before he would own it to any third person. However, we may as well go and have a look. I shall work it out on my own hook. I may have a laugh at them, if I have nothing else. Come on. He hustled on his overcoat and bustled about in a way that showed that an energetic fit had superseded the apathic one. And get your hat, he said. You wish me to come? Yes, if you have nothing better to do. A minute later, we were both in a hansom, driving furiously for the Brixton Road. You don't seem to give much thought to the matter in hand, I said at last, interrupting Holmes' musical disquisition. No data yet, he answered. It is a capital mistake to theorize before you have all the evidence. It biases the judgment. You will have your data soon, I remarked, pointing with a finger. This is the Brixton Road, and that is the house, if I am not very much mistaken. So it is. Stop, driver, stop. We were still 100 yards or so from it, but he insisted upon our lightning, and we finished our journey upon foot. Number 3. The Lauriston Gardens were an ill-omened and minatory luck. It was one of the 4 which stood back some little way from the street, 2 being occupied and 2 empty. The latter looked out with 3 tiers of vacant, melancholy windows, which were black and dreary, save that here and there tulip card had developed like a cataract upon a small cottage sprinkled over with a scattered eruption of sickly plants separated each of these houses from the street, and was traversed by a narrow pathway, yellowish in color, and consisting apparently of a mixture of clay and of gravel. The whole place was very sloppy from the rain. Slopey from the rain, which had fallen through the night. The garden was bounded by a 3-foot brick wall with a fringe of wood rails upon the top. And against this wall was leaning a stalwart police constable surrounded by a small knot of loafers who craned their necks and strained their eyes in the vain hope of catching some glimpse of the proceedings within. I had imagined that Sherlock Holmes would at once have hurried into the house and plunged into a study of the mystery. Nothing appeared to be further from the intention. With an air of nonchalance, which, under the circumstances, seemed to me to border upon affection, he lounged up and down the pavement and gazed vacantly at the ground, the sky, the opposite houses, and the line of railing. Having finished this scrutiny, he proceeded slowly down the path, or rather down the fringe of grass which flanked the path, keeping his eyes riveted upon the ground. Twice he stopped, and once I saw him smile, and heard him utter an exclamation of satisfaction. There were many marks of footprints upon the wet, glistening soil, but since the police had been coming and going over it, I was unable to see how my companion could hope to learn anything from it. Still, I had such extraordinary evidence of the quickness of his perceptive faculties that I had no doubt that he could see a great deal which was hidden from me. At the door of the house, we were met by a tall, white-faced, flaxen-haired man with a notebook in his hand, who rushed forward and wrung my companion's hand with affection. "It is indeed kind of you to come," he said. "I have had everything left untouched." "Except that," my friend answered, pointing at the pathway. "If a herd of buffaloes had pushed along here, there could not be a great mess, no doubt. However, you had drawn your own conclusions, Gregson, before you permitted this." "I have had so much to do inside the house," the detective said. Basically, my colleague, Mr. Lestrade, is here. I had relied upon him to look after this. Holmes glanced at me and raised his eyebrows sardonically. With two such men as yourself and Lestrade upon the ground, there will not be much for a third party to find out, he said. Gregson rubbed his hands in a self-satisfied way. "I think we have done all that can be done," he answered. "It's a queer case, though, and I know your taste for such things." "You did not come here in a cab," asked Sherlock. "No, sir." "No, Lestrade?" "No, sir." "Then let us go and look at the home." With which inconsequent remark, he strode on into the house, followed by Gregson, whose features expressed his astonishment. A short passage, bare planked and dusty, led to the kitchen and offices. 2 doors opened out of it, to the left and to the right. One of these had obviously been closed for many weeks. The other belonged to the dining room, which was the apartment in which the mysterious affair had occurred. Holmes walked in, and I followed him with that subdued feeling of my heart which the presence of death inspired. It was a large square room, looking all the larger from the absence of all the furniture. A vulgar flare paper adorned the walls, but it was blotched in places with mildew, and here and there great stripes had become detached and hung down, exposing the yellow plaster beneath. Opposite the door was a showy fireplace, surmounted by a mantelpiece of imitation white marble. On one corner of this was struck the stumps of a red wax candle. The solitary window was so dirty that the light was hazy and uncertain, giving a dull gray tinge to everything, which was intensified by the thick layer of dust which coated the whole apartment. All these details I observed afterwards. At present, my attention was centered upon the single grim, motionless figure which lay stretched upon the board, with vacant, sightless eyes staring up at the discolored ceiling. It was that of a man about 43 or 44 years of age, middle-sized, broad-shouldered, with crisp curling black hair and a short, stubby beard. He was dressed in a heavy, broadcloth frock coat and waistcoat, with light-colored trousers and immaculate collar and cuffs. A top hat, well brushed and trim, was placed upon the floor beside him. His hands were clenched and his arms thrown broad, while his lower limbs were interlocked, as though his death struggle had been a grievous one. On his rigid face there stood an expression of horror, and as it seemed to me, of hatred, such as I have never seen upon human features. This malignant and terrible contortion, combined with the low forehead, blunt nose, and procumbent jaw, gave the dead man a singularly sinuous and ape-like appearance, which was increased by his withering, unnatural posture. I have seen death in many forms, but never has it appeared to me in a more fearsome aspect than in that dark, grimy apartment, which looked out upon one of the main arteries of suburban London. Lestrade, lean and ferret-like as ever, was standing by the doorway and greeted my companion and myself. "This case will make a stir, sir," he remarked. "It beats anything I have seen, and I am no chicken." "There is no clue," said Gregson. "Not at all," chimed in Lestrade. Sherlock Holmes approached the body, and kneeling down, examined it intently. "You are sure that there is no wound?" he asked, pointing to numerous cuts and splashes of blood which lay all around. "Positive," cried both detectives. "Then of course this blood belongs to a second individual, presumably the murderer. If murder has been committed, it reminds me of the circumstances attendant on death of Van Jansen in Utrecht in the year '34. Do you remember the case, Gregson?" "No, sir." "Read it up. You really should. There is nothing new under the sun. It has all been done before." As he spoke, his able fingers was flying here and there and everywhere, feeling, pressing, unbuttoning, examining, while his eyes wore the same faraway expression which I have already remarked upon. So swiftly was the examination made that one would hardly have guessed the minuteness with which it was conducted. Finally, they sniffed the dead man's lips, and then glanced at the soles of his patient leather boots. "He has not been moved at all?" he asked. "No more than was necessary for the purposes of our examination." "You could take him to the mortuary now," he said. "There is nothing more to be learned." Gregson had a stretcher and 4 men at hand at his call that entered the room, and the stranger was lifted and carried away. As they raised him, a ring tinkled down and rolled across the floor. Lestrade grabbed it up and stared at it with mystified eyes. "There's been a woman here," he cried. "It's a woman's wedding ring." He held it out, and he spoke upon the palm of his hand. We all gathered around and gazed at it. There could be no doubt that the circlet of plain gold had once adorned the finger of a bride. "This complicates matters," said Gregson. "Heaven knows they were complicated enough before." "You're sure it doesn't simplify them?" observed Holmes. "There's nothing to be learned by staring at it. What did you find in his pockets?" "We have it all here," said Gregson, pointing to a litter of objects upon one of the bottom steps of the stairs. "A gold watch, number 97163, by Baroud of London. Gold Albert chain, very heavy and solid. Gold ring, with Masonic device. Gold pin, bulldog's head, with rubies as eyes. Russian leather card case, with the cards of Enoch J. Drebber of Cleveland, corresponding with the EJT upon the linen. No purse, but loose money to the extent of several pounds, £7.13. Pocket edition of Boccacio's Decameron with the name of Joseph Stangerson upon the fly leaf. 2 letters, one addressed to E.J. Drebber and one to Joseph Stangerson. At what address? American Exchange, Strand, to be left till called for. They are both from Gregson Steamship Company, and refer to the sailing of their boats from Liverpool. It is clear that this unfortunate man was about to return to New York. Have you made any inquiries as to this man Stangerson? I did it at once, sir, said Gregson. I have had advertisements sent to all the newspapers, and one of my men had gone to the American Exchange, but he has not returned yet. Have you sent to Cleveland? We telegraphed this morning. How did you word your inquiries? We simply detailed the circumstances and said that we should be glad of any information which could help us. You did not ask for particulars on any point which appeared to you to be critical. I asked about Stangerson. Nothing else? Is there no circumstances on which this whole case appears to hinge? Will you not telegraph again? I have said all I have to say, said Gregson in an offended voice. Sherlock Holmes chuckled to himself and appeared to be about to make some remark when Lestrade, who had been in the front room while we were holding this conversation in the hall, reappeared upon the scene, rubbing his hands in a pompous and self-satisfied manner. Mr. Gregson, he said, I just made a discovery of this highest importance, and one which would have been overlooked had I not made a careful examination of the walls. The little maid's eyes sparkled as he spoke, and he was evidently in a state of suppressed exultation of having scored a point against his colleagues. Come here, he said, bustling back into the room, the atmosphere of which felt clearer since the removal of the ghastly inmate. Now, stand here. He struck a match on his boot and held it up against the wall. Look at that, he said triumphantly. I have remarked that the paper had fallen away in parts, and that this particular corner of the room a large piece had peeled off, leaving a yellow square of coarse plastering. Across this bare space there is a scrawled in blood red letters, a single word, Rachie. What do you think of that? Cried the detective, with the air of a showman exhibiting his show. This was overlooked because it was in the darkest corner of the room and no one thought of looking there. The murderer has written it with his own and her own blood. See this smear where it has trickled down the wall? That disposes of the idea of suicide anyhow. Why was that corner chosen to write it on? I will tell you. See that candle on the mantelpiece? It was lit at the time, and if it was lit, this corner would be the brightest instead of the darkest portion of the wall. And what does it mean now that you have found it? Said Gregson in a deprecatory voice. Mean? What it means is that the writer was going to put the female name Rachel, but was disturbed before he or she had time to finish. You mark my words, when this case comes to be cleared up, you will find that a woman named Rachel has something to do with it. It's all very well for you to laugh, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. You may be very smart and clever, but the old hound is the best when all is said and done. I really beg your pardon, said my companion, who had ruffled the little man's temper by bursting into an explosion of laughter. You certainly have the credit of being the first of us to find this out. And, as you say, it bears every mark of having been written by the other participant in last night's mystery. I have not had time to examine this room yet, but with your permission, I shall do so now. As he spoke, he whipped a tape measure and a large round magnifying glass from his pocket. But these two implements, they trotted noiselessly about the room, sometimes stopping, occasionally kneeling, and once laying flat upon his face. So engrossed was he with his occupation that he appeared to have forgotten our presence, for he chattering away to himself under his breath the whole time, keeping up a running fire of exclamations, groans, whistles, and little cries suggestive of encouragement and of hope. As I watched him, I was irresistibly reminded of a pure-blooded, well-trained foxhound as it dashes backwards and forward through the cavern, widening in its eagerness until it comes across the lost scent. For 20 minutes or more, he continued his researches, measuring with the most exact care distance between the marks which were entirely invisible to me, and occasionally applying his tape to the walls in an exactly incomprehensible manner. In one place, he gathered up very carefully a little pile of gray dust from the floor and packed it away in an envelope. Finally, he examined with his glass the word upon the wall, going over every letter of it with the most minute exactness. This done, he appeared to be satisfied, for he replaced his tape and his glass in his pocket. They say that genius is infinite capacity for taking pains, he remarked with a smile. It's a very bad definition, but it does apply to deductive work. Gregson and Lestrade had watched the maneuvers of their amateur companion with considerable curiosity and some contempt. They evidently failed to appreciate the fact, which I had begun to realize, that Sherlock Holmes' smallest actions were all directed towards some definite and practical end. What do you think of it, sir? They both asked. It would be robbing you of the credit of the case if I was to presume to help you, remarked my friend. You are doing so well now that it would be a pity for anyone to interfere. There was a word of sarcasm in his voice as he spoke. If you will let me know how investigations go, he continued, I shall be happy to give you any help I can. In the meantime, I should like to speak to the constable who found the body. Can you give me his name and information? Give me his name and address, sorry. Lestrade glanced at his notebook. John Rance, he said. He is off duty now. You'll find him at 46 Audiobook, Kington Park Gate. Holmes took a note of the address. Come along, doctor, he said. We shall go and look him up. I'll tell you one thing which may help you in the case, he continued, turning to the two detectives. There has been murder done, and the murderer was a man. He was more than 6 feet tall, 6 feet high, was in the prime of life, had small feet for his highest, wore coarse square-toed boots, smoked a chin-off-leaf cigar. He came here with his victim in a four-wheel cab, which was drawn by a horse with 3 old shoes and one new one on his off foreleg. In all probability, the murderer had a florid face, and the fingernails of his right hand were remarkably long. These are only a few indications, but they may assist you. Lestrade and Gregson glanced at each other with incredulous smiles. Credulous. If this man was murdered, how was it done? Asked the former. Poison, said Sherlock Holmes curtly. And showed off. One more thing, Lestrade, he added, turning round at the door. Rachel is the German name for revenge, so don't lose your time by looking for Miss Rachel. With which Harshian shot, he walked away, leaving the two rivals open-mouthed behind him. Chapter 4. What John Rance had to tell. It was 1 o'clock when we left. Number 3, Lauriston Gardens. Sherlock Holmes led me to the nearest telegraph office, whence he dispatched a long telegram. He then hailed a cab and ordered the driver to take us to the address given us by Lestrade. There is something like first-hand evidence, he remarked. As a matter of fact, my mind is entirely made up upon the case, but still, we may as well learn all that is to be learned. You amaze me, Holmes, said I. Surely you are not as sure as you pretend to be of all these particulars which you give. There is no room for mistakes, he answered. The very first thing which I observed on arriving there was that a cab had made 2 ruts, with its wheels close to the curb. Now, up to last night, we have had no rain for a week, so that those wheels which left such a deep impression must have been there during the night. There were the marks of the horse hooves too, the outline of one of which was far more clearly cut than that of the other 3, showing that there was a new shoe, since the cab was there after the rain began, and was not there at any time during the morning. I have Gregson's word for that. It follows that it must have been there during the night, and therefore that it brought those two individuals to the house. That seems simple enough, and said I, but how about the other man's height? Why, the height of a man, in 9 cases out of 10, can be told from the length of his stride. It is a simple calculation enough, though there is no use my boring you with figures. I had this fellow stride both on the clay outside and on the dust within. Then I had a way of checking my calculations. When a man writes on the wall, his instincts lead him to write about the level of his own eyes. Now that writing was just over 6 feet from the ground, it was child's play. And his age, I asked? Well, if a man can stride 4.5 feet without the smallest effort, it can't be quite in the sheer and yellow. That was the breadth of a puddle on the garden walk, which he had evidently walked across. Patent leather boots had gone round, and square toes had popped over. There is no mystery about it at all. I am simply applying to ordinary life a few of those precepts of observation and deduction which I advocated in that article. Is there anything else that puzzles you? The fingernails and the tritopography, I suggested. The writing on the wall was done with a man's forefinger dipping in blood. My glass showed me to observe that the plaster was slightly scratched in doing it, which would not have been the case if the man's nail had been trimmed. I gathered up some scratch ash from the floor. It was dark in color and flaky, such an ash as only made by a chinapri. I have made a special study of cigar ashes. In fact, I have written a monograph upon the subject. I flattered myself that I can distinguish at a glance the ash of any known brand, either of cigar or of tobacco. It is just in such details that the skilled detective differs from Gregson and Lestrade type. And the florid-faced? I asked. That was more of a daring shot. Oh, I have no doubt that I was right. You must not ask me that at the present state of my affair. I passed my hand over my brow. My head is in a whirl, I remarked. The more one thinks of it, the more mysterious it grows. How can these two men, if they were two men, into an empty house? What has become of the cabman who drove them? How could one man compel another to take poison? Where did the blood come from? What was the object of the murderer? Since Robbie had no part in it. How came the woman's ring there? Above all, why should the second man write up the German word "ranchy" before decamping? I confess that I cannot see any possible way of reconciling all these facts. My companion smiled approvingly. You sum up the difficulties of the situation succinctly and well, he said. There is much that is still obscure, though I have quite made up my mind on the main facts. As the poor Lestrade's discovery, it was simply a blind intended to put the police upon the wrong track by suggesting socialism in secret societies. It was not done by a German. The A, if you noticed, was printed somewhat after the German fashion. Now a real German invariably prints in a Latin character, so that we may safely say that this was not written by one, but by a clumsy imitator who overdid his part. It was simply a ruse to divert inquiry into a wrong channel. I'm not going to tell you much more of the case, Doctor. You know, a conjurer gets no credit once he has explained his trick. If I show you too much of my method of working, you will come to the conclusion that I am very ordinarily individual after that. I shall never do that, I answered. You have brought detection as near an exact science as it ever will be brought in this world. My companion flashed up with pleasure at my words, in the earnest way in which I uttered them. I had already observed that he was as sensitive to flattery on the score of his art as any girl could be of her beauty. I'll tell you one other thing, he said. Patent leathers in square toe come in the same cab, and they walked down the pathway together as friendly as possible, arm in arm in all possibility. When they got inside, they walked up and down the room, or rather, patent leather stood still while square toes walked up and down. I could read all of that in the dust, and I could read that as he walked, he grew more and more excited. That is shown by the increased length of his strides. He was talking all the while, and working himself up, no doubt, into a fury. Then the tragedy occurred. I've told you all that I know myself. For the rest is mere surmise and conjecture. We have a good working basis, however, on which to start. We must hurry, for I want to go to Hale's concert to hear Norman Neruda this afternoon. This conversation had occurred while our cab had been treading its way through a long succession of dingy streets and dreary byways. In the dingiest and dreariest of them, our driver suddenly came to a stand. That's oddly cored in there, he said, pointing to a narrow slit in the line of dead-colored bricks. You'll find me here when you come out. Audley Court was not as attractive locally. The narrow patch led us into a quadrangle paved with flag and line by solded dwellings. We picked our way among groups of dirty children and through lines of discolored linen, until we came to number 46, the door of which was decorated with a small slip of brass, on which the name Rance was engraved. On inquiry, we found that the constable was in bed, and we were shown into a little front parlor to await his coming. He appeared presently, looking a little irritable at being disturbed in his slumbers. I made my report at the office, he said. Holmes took a half-sovereign from his pocket and played with it pensively. We thought that we should like to hear it all from your own lips, he said. I shall be most happy to tell you anything I can, the constable answered, with its eyes upon the little golden disc. Just let us hear it all in your own words as they occurred. Franchi sat down on the horsehair sofa and knitted his brows, as though determined not to omit anything in his narrative. I'll tell you from the beginning, he said. My time is from 10 at night to 6 in the morning. At 11, there was a fight at the White Hart, but bar that all was quiet enough on the beat. At 1 o'clock, it began to rain, and I met Mary Mercier, him who has the Holland Grove beat, and we stood together at the corner of Henrietta Street. A talkins presently, maybe about 2 or a little after. I thought I would take a look around and see that all was right down the Brixton Road. It was precious dirty and lonely. Not a soul did I meet all the way down, though a cab or two went past me. I was strolling down, thinking between ourselves how uncommon handy a 4 of gin hot would be. when suddenly the glint of a light caught my eye in the window of that same house. Now I knew that the two houses and Lauriston Garden was empty on account of him that owns them, who won't have the drained seed to. Though the very last tenant, what lived in one of them, died of typhoid fever. I was knocked all in a heap therefore, as seeing a light in the window, and I suspected that something was wrong. When I got to the door, you stopped, and then walked back to the garden gate, my companion interrupted. What did you do that for? Rance gave a violent jump and stared at Sherlock Holmes with the utmost amazement upon his features. Why, that's true, sir, he said, though how you come to know it, heaven only knows. You see, when I got up to the door, I was so still and lonesome that I thought I'd be none the worse for someone with me. I ain't feared of anything on this side of the grave, and I thought that maybe it was him that died. All the trembled, inspecting the drain, what killed him. The thought gave me a kind of turn, and I walked back to the gate to see if I could see Miniature's lantern, but there wasn't no sign of him nor of anyone else. There was no one in the street? Not a living soul, sir. Not as much as a dog. Then I pulled myself together and went back and pushed the door open. All was quiet inside, so I went into the room, where the light was burning. There was a candle flickering on the mantelpiece, and a red wax one, and by its light I saw. Yes, I know all that you saw. You walked around the room several times, and you knelt down by the body, and then you walked through and tried the kitchen door, and then... John Rance sprung to his feet with a frightened face and suspicion in his eyes. Where was you hid to see all that? He cried. It seems to me that you know a deal more than you should. Holmes laughed and threw his card across the table to the constable. Don't get arresting me for murder, he said. I am the one of the hounds and not the wolf. Mr. Gregson and Mr. Lestrade will answer for that. Go on, though. What did you do next? Rance resumed his seat without, however, losing his mystified expression. I went back to the gate and sounded my whistle. That brought Rochester and two more to the spot. Was the street empty then? Well, it was, as far as anybody that could be, and any good goes. What do you mean? The constable's features broadened into a grin. I've seen many a drunk clap in my time, he said, but never anyone so crying drunk as they cove. He was at the gate when I came out, leaning up, aging the railings, singing at the pitch, all his lungs about Columbine's new fangled banner, or some such stuff. He couldn't stand far less help. What sort of man was he? Asked Sherlock Holmes. John Rance appeared to be somewhat irritated at this digression. He was an uncommon drunk sort of man, he said. He'd found himself in the station if we hadn't been so took up. His face, his dress, didn't you notice them? Holmes broke impatiently. I should think I did notice them, seeing that I had to prop him up, me and Rochester between us. It was a long chap, with a red face, the lower part muffled round. That will do, cried Holmes. What became of him? We'd enough to do without looking after him, the policeman said, in an aggravated voice. I wager he found his way home all right. How was he dressed? A brown overcoat. Had he a whip in his hand? A whip? No. He must have left it behind, muttered my companion. You didn't happen to see or hear a cab after that? No. Here's a house sovereign for you, my companion said, standing up and taking his hat. I'm afraid, Ranchi, that you'll never rise in the force. The head of yours should be for use as well as ornament. You might have gained your sergeant's stripes last night. Hold on, it's sergeant stripes last night. The man whom you held in your hand is the man who holds the clue of this mystery, and whom we are seeking. There is no use of arguing about it. I'll tell you that it is so. Come along, Doctor. We started off with a cab together, leaving our informant incredulous but obviously uncomfortable. The blundering fool, Holmes said bitterly, as we drove back to our lodgings. Just to think of his having such an incomparable bit of good luck and not taking advantage of it. I am rather in the dark still. It is true that the description of this man tallies with your idea of the second party in the mystery. But why should he come back to the house after leaving it? That is not the way of the criminals. The ring, man. The ring, that was what he came back for. If we have no other way of catching him, we can always bait our line with the ring. I shall have him, Doctor. I'll lay you two to one that I have him. I must thank you for it all. I might not have gone, but for you, I so have missed the finest study I ever come across. A study in Scarlet. Why shouldn't we use a little our jargon? There's the scarlet thread of murder running through the colorless skin of life, and our duty is to unravel it and isolate it and expose every inch of it. And now for lunch, and then Norman. Hey Ruda. Her attack and her bowing are splendid. What's the little thing of Colton she plays so magnificently? Try, la la. Lie. Way back in the cab, this amateur bloodhound caroled away like a lark while I meditated upon the many-sidedness of the human mind. Chapter 5. Our advertisement brings a visitor. Our morning's excursions had been too many for my weak health, and I was tired out in the afternoon. After Holmes' departure for the concert, I laid down upon the sofa and devoured to get a couple hours of sleep. It was a useless attempt. My mind had been too much excited by all that had occurred, that had occupied, and the strangest fancies and surmises crowded into it. Every time that I closed my eyes, I saw before me the distorted, baboon-like countenance of the murdered man. So sinister was the impression which that face had produced upon me that I found it difficult to feel anything but gratitude for him who had removed its owner from the world. If ever human features bespoke vice of the most elegant type, they were certainly those of Roach J. Drebber of Cleveland. Still, I recognized that justice must be done, and the depravity of the victim was no condonment in the eyes of the law. The more I thought of it, the more extraordinary did my companion's hypothesis that the man had been poisoned appeared. I remembered how he had sniffed his lips and had no doubt that he had detected something which had given rise to the idea. Then again, if not poison, what had caused the man's health? Since there was neither wound nor marks of strangulation, but on the other hand, whose blood was that which lay so thickly upon the floor? There were no signs of a struggle, nor had the victim any weapons with which he might have wounded an antagonist. As long as all these questions were unsolved, I felt that sleep would be no easy matter. Either for Holmes or myself, his quiet, self-confident manner convinced me that he had already formed a theory which explains all the facts, though what it was I could not for an instant conjure. He was very late in returning, so late that I knew that the concert could not have detained him all the time. Dinner was on the table before he appeared. It was magnificent, he said, as he took his seat. Do you remember what Darwin says about music? He claims that the power of producing and appreciating existed among the human race long before the power of speech was arrived at. Perhaps that is why we are so subtly influenced by it. There are vague memories in our souls of those misty creatures when the world was in its childhood. That's rather a broad idea, I remarked. One's ideas must be as broad as nature, if they are to interpret nature, he answered. What's the matter? You're not looking quite yourself. This Vexen Road affairs has upset you. To tell the truth, it has, I said. I ought to be more hardened after my Afghan experience. I saw my own comrades hacked to pieces and mid-wand without losing my nerve. I can understand. There is a mystery about this which stimulates the imagination. Where there is no imagination, there is no horror. Have you seen the evening paper? No. It gives a fairly good account of the affair. It does not mention the fact that when the man was raised up, a woman's wedding ring fell upon the floor. And it's just as well, it does not? Why? Look at this advertisement, he answered. I had one sent to every paper this morning immediately after the affair. He threw the paper across to me, and I glanced at the place indicated. It was the first announcement in the found column in Vixen Road this morning. It ran, a plain gold wedding ring found in the roadway between the White Hart Tavern and the Whole Land Grove. Apply Dr. Watson, 221B Baker Street, between 8 and 9 this evening. Excuse me using your name, he said. If I use my own, some of those dunderheads would recognize it and want to meddle in the affairs. That is all right, I answered. But supposing anyone applies, I have no ring. Oh yes, you have, said he, handing me one. This will do very well. It is almost a facsimile. And who do you expect will answer this advertisement? Why, the man in the brown coat, our florid friend with the square toes. If he does not come himself, he will send an accomplice. Would he not consider it as too dangerous? Not at all. If my view of the case is correct, and I have every reason to believe that it is, this man would rather risk anything than lose the ring. According to my notion, he dropped it while stooping over Drebber's body and did not miss it at the time. After leaving the house, he discovered his loss and hurried back, but found the police already in possession. Owing to his own folly in leaving the candle burning, he had to pretend to be drunk in order to allay the suspicions which might have been aroused by his appearance at the gate. Now put yourself in the man's place. On thinking the matter over, it must have occurred to him that it was possible that he had lost the ring in the road after leaving the house. What would he do then? He would eagerly look out for the evening paper in the hope of seeing it among the articles found. His eye, of course, would alight upon this. He would be overjoyed. Why should he fear a trap? There would be no reason in his eyes why the finding of the ring should be connected with the murder. He would come. He will come. You shall see him within an hour. And then, I asked. Oh, you can leave me to deal with him then. Have you any arms? I have my old service revolver and a few cartridges. You had better clean it and load it. He will be a desperate man, and though I shall take him unawares, it is as well to be ready for anything. I went to my bedroom and followed his advice. When I returned with the pistol, the table had been cleared, and Holmes was engaged in his favorite occupation of scraping upon his violin. The plot thickens, he said as I entered. I have just had an answer to my American telegram. My view of the case is the correct one. And that is? I asked eagerly. My fiddle would be the better for new strings, he remarked. Put your pistol in your pocket. When the fellow comes, speak to him in an ordinary way. Leave the rest to me. Don't frighten him by looking at him too hard. It is 8 o'clock now, I said, glancing at my watch. Yes, he will probably be here in a few minutes. Open the door slightly. That will do. Now put the key on the inside. Thank you. This is a clear open book. Old book, sorry. I picked up at a stall yesterday. De Jure Inter Gentis, published in Latin at Legion Lorlands in 1642. Charles' head was still firm on his shoulders when this little brown-backed volume was struck off. Who is the printer? Philippe de Croix, whoever he may have been, on the fly-leaf in very faded ink, in written ex libris. Galimelli Whitey. I wonder who William Whitey was. Some Pacamental 17th century lawyer, I suppose. His writing has a legal twist about it. Here comes our man, I think. As he spoke, there was a sharp ring at the door, at the bell. Sherlock Holmes rose softly and moved his chair in the direction of the door. He heard the servant pass along the hall, and the sharp click of the latch as she opened it. Does Mr. Watson live here? Asked a clear but rather harsh voice. They should not hear the servant's reply, but the door closed, and someone began to ascend the stairs. The fourth hall was an uncertain and shuffling one. A look of surprise passed over the face of my companion as he listened to it. I came slowly along the passage, and there was a feeble tap on the door. Come in. At my summons, instead of a man of violence whom we expected, a very old, wrinkly woman hobbled into the apartment. She appeared to be dazzled by the sudden blaze of light, and after dropping a curtsy and stood blinking at us with her bleared eyes and bubbling in her pocket with nervous, sticky fingers. I glanced at my companion, and his face had assumed such a disconsolated expression that it was all I could do to keep my countenance. The old crone drew out an evening paper and pointed at an advertisement. It's this as has brought me, good gentleman, she said, dropping another curtsy. A gold wedding ring in the Brixton Road. It belongs to my girl Sally, as was married only this time 12 months, which her husband is sworn abroad on Union Bow, and what he say if he came home and found her without her ring is more than I can think. He being short enough at the best of times, but more especially when he has the drink. If it please you, she went to the circus last night along with. Is that her ring? I asked. The Lord be thanked, cried the old woman. Sally will be a glad woman this night. That's the ring. And what may your address be? I inquired, taking up a pencil. 13 Duncan Street, Houndsditch, a weary way from here. The Brixton Road does not lie between any circus and Houndsditch, said Sherlock Holmes sharply. The old woman faced round and looked nearly at him from her little red-rimmed eyes. The gentleman asked me for my address, she said. Sally lives in a lodging at 3 Mayfield Place, Peckham. And your name is? My name is Sawyer. Hers is Dennis, which Tom Dennis married her. And a smart, clean lad, too, as long as he's at sea, and no sword in the company more thought of. But when on shore, what's with the woman, and what's with liquor shops? Here is your ring, Miss Sawyer, I interrupted, in obedience to a sign from my companion. It clearly belongs to your daughter, and I am glad to be able to restore it to the rightful owner. With many mumbled blessings and protestations of gratitude, the old crone packed it away in her pocket and shuffled off down the stairs. Sherlock Holmes sprang to his feet the moment that she was gone and rushed into his room. He returned in a few seconds, enveloped in an ulster and a cravat. I'll follow her, he said heartily. She must be an accomplice and will lead me to him. Wait up for me. The hall door had hardly slammed behind our visitor before Holmes descended the stairs. Looking through the window, I could see her walking feebly along the other side, while her pursuer dodged her some little distance behind. Either this whole theory is correct, I thought to myself, or else he will be led now to the heart of the mystery. There was no need for him to ask me to wait up for him, for I felt that sleep was impossible until I heard the result of this adventure. It was close upon 9 when he set out. I had no idea how long he might be, but I sat sturdily puffing at my pipe and skipping over the pages of Henry Merger's Vice de Mohammed. 10 o'clock passed, and I heard the footsteps of the maid that pattered off to bed. 11, and the more stately tread of the landlady passed my door, bound for the same destination. It was close upon 12 before I heard the sharp sound of his latch key. The instant he entered, I saw by his face that he had not been successful. Amusement and charging seemed to be struggling for the mastery, until the former suddenly carried the day, and he burst into a hearty laugh. I wouldn't have the Scotland Yarders know it for the world, he cried, dropping into his chair. I have chaffed them so much that they would never have let me hear the end of it. I can afford to laugh, because I know that I will be even with them in the long run. What is it then? Oh, don't mind telling the story against myself. That creature had gone a little way. when she began to limp and show every sign of being footsore. Presently, she came to a halt and hailed a four-wheeler which was passing. I managed to be close to her so as to hear the address, but I need not have been so anxious, for she sang it out long enough to be heard at the other side of the street. "Drive to 13 Douglas Street, Hampstead," she cried. "This begins to look genuine," I thought, and having seen her safely inside, I perched myself behind. After an hour which every detective should be an expert at, well, away we rattled, and never drew rein until we reached the street in question. I hopped off before we came to the door, and strolled down the street. In an easy lounging way, I saw the cab pull up. The driver jumped down, and I saw him open the door and stand expectantly. Nothing came out though. When I reached him, he was groping about frantically in the empty cab and giving vent to the finest assorted collection of oaths that ever I listened to. There was no sign or trace of his passenger, and I fear it will be some time before he gets his fare. On inquiring at number 13, we found that the house belonged to the respectable paper hanger named Keswick, and there no one of the name, either Sawyer or Dennis, had ever been heard of there. "You don't mean to say," I cried in amazement, "that the tottering, feeble old woman was able to get out of the cab while it was in motion without either you or the driver seeing her?" "Old woman be damned," said Sherlock Holmes sharply. We were the old woman to be so taken in. It must have been a young man, and an active one, too, besides being an incomparable actor. The gave-up was immensible. He saw that he was followed, no doubt, and used this means of giving me the slip. It shows that the man we are after is not as lonely as I imagined he was, but has friends who are ready to risk something for him. Now, doctor, are you looking done up? Take my advice and turn in." I was certainly feeling very weary, so I obeyed his injunction. I left Holmes seated in front of the smoldering fire, and long into the watches of night I heard the melancholy wailing of his violin, and knew that he was still pondering over the strange problem which he had set himself to unravel. Okay, so chapter 6 is called Tobias Gregson Shows What He Can Do. The papers next day were full of the Brixton mystery, as they termed it. Each day was a long account of the affair, and some had leaders upon it in addition. There was some information in them which was new to me. I still retained in my scrapbook numerous clippings and extracts bearing upon the case. Here is a condensation of a few of them. The Daily Telegraph remarked that in the history of crime, there had long been a tragedy which presented stranger features. The German name of the victim, the absence of all other motive, and the sinister inscription on the wall all pointed to its perpetration by political refugees and revolutionists? Revolutionists. The socialists had many branches in America, and the deceased had, no doubt, infringed their unwritten laws and had been tracked down by them. After alluding early to the Gertat, Aqua Tofana, Barbari, the Merchonis de Villers, the Darwin theory, the principles of Malthus, and the Ratcliffe Highway murders. The article concluded by admonishing the government and advocating a closer watch over foreigners in England. The Standard commented upon the fact that lawless outrages of this sort usually occurred under a liberal administration. Those arose from the unsettling of the minds of the masses, and the consequent weakening of all authority. The deceased was an American gentleman who had been residing for some weeks in the metropolis. He had stayed at the boarding house of Madame Carpenter and Torquay Terence, Camberwell. He was accompanied in his travels by his private secretary, Mr. Joseph Strangerson. The two bade adieu to their landlady upon Tuesday, the 4th inst., and departed to Euston Station with the avowed intention of catching the Liverpool express. They were afterwards seen together upon the platform. Nothing more is known of them until Mr. Breber's body was, as recorded, discovered in an empty house in the Bristol Road, many miles from Euston. How he came there, or how he met his fate, are questions which are still involved in mystery. Nothing is known of the whereabouts of Strangerson. We are glad to learn that Mr. Lestrade and Mr. Gregson of Scotland Yard are both engaged upon the case, and it is confidently anticipated that these well-known officers will speedily throw light upon the matter. The Daily News observed that there was no doubt as to the crime being a political one. The despotism and hatred of the liberalism which animated the constitutional governments had the effect of driving to our shores a number of men who might have made excellent citizens, were they not soured by the recollection of all that they had undergone. Among these men, there was a stringent code of honor, any infringement of which was punished by death. Every effort should be made to find the secretary, stranger's son, and to ascertain some particulars of the habits of the deceased. A great step had been gained by the discovery of the address of the house at which he had boarded, a result which was entirely due to the acuteness and energy of Mr. Gregson of Scotland Yard. Sherlock Holmes and I read those notices over together at breakfast, and they appeared to afford him considerable amusement. I told you that, whatever happened, the stranger Gregson will be sure to score. That depends on how it turns out. Oh, bless you, it doesn't matter in the least. If the man is caught, it will be on account of their execrations. If he escapes, it will be in spite of their execrations. It's heads I win and tails you lose. Whatever they do, they will have followers. Un sot chove tortoris, un passot ye Vladimir. What on earth is that? I cried, for at this moment there came the pattering of many steps in the hall and on the stairs, accompanied by audible expressions of disgust upon the part of our landlady. It's the Baker Street division of the detective police force, said my companion gravely. And as he spoke, there rushed into the room half a dozen of the dirtiest and most rag-streaked Arabs that ever I clapped eyes on. "Attention!" cried Holmes in a sharp tone, and the 6 dirty little scoundrels stood in a line, like so many disreputable statues. In future you shall send up Wiggins along to report, and the rest of you must wait in the street. Have you found it, Wiggins? No, sir, we haven't. said one of the youths. I hardly expected you would. Must keep on until you do. Here are your wages. He handed each of them a shilling. Now off you go and come back with a better report next time. He waved his hand and they scampered away, downstairs like so many rats. And we heard their shrill voices next moment in the street. There's more work to be got out of one of those little beggars than out of a dozen of the forces, Holmes remarked. The mere sight of an official-looking person seals men's lips. These youngsters, however, go everywhere and hear everything. They are as sharp as needles, too. All they want is organization. It is on this Gregson case that you are employing them, I asked. Yes, there is a point which I wish to ascertain. It is merely a matter of time. Hello, we are going to hear some news, now with a vengeance. Here is Gregson coming down the road, with a beatitude written upon every feature of his face. Bound for us, I know. Yes, he is stopping. There he is. There was a violent pearl at the bell, and in a few seconds the fair-haired detective came up the stairs, 3 steps at a time, and burst into our sitting room. My dear fellow, he cried, wringing Holmes' a responsive hand. Congratulate me. I have made the whole thing as clear as day. A shade of anxiety seemed to me to cross my companion's expressive face. Do you mean that you are on the right track? He asked. The right track? Why, sir, we have the man under lock and key, and his name is Arthur Carpenter, sub-lieutenant in Her Majesty's Navy, cried Gregson pompously, rubbing his fat hands and inflating his chest. Sherlock Holmes gave a sigh of relief and relaxed into a smile. Take a seat and try one of these cigars, he said. We are anxious to know how you managed it. Will you have some whiskey and water? I don't mind if I do, the detective answered. The tremendous exertion which I have gone through during the last day or two have worn me out. Not so much bodily exertion, you understand, as the strain upon the mind. You will appreciate that, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, for we are both brain workers. You do me too much honor, said Holmes gravely. Let us hear how you arrived at this most gratifying result. The detective seated himself in the armchair and puffed complacently at his cigar. Then suddenly he slapped his thigh in a paroxysm of amusement. The fun of it is, he cried, that fool Lestrade, who thinks himself so smart, has gone off upon the wrong track altogether. He is after the Secretary Stranger's sons, who had no more to do with the crime than the babe unborn. I have no doubt that he has caught him by his time. The idea tickled Gregson so much that he laughed until he choked. And how did you get your clue? Tell you all about it, of course, Dr. Watson. This is strictly between ourselves. The first difficulty which he had to contend with was the finding of his Americans antecedent and descendants. Some people would have waited until their advertisements were answered, or until parties came forward and volunteered information. That is not Tobias Gregson's way of going to work. You remember that hat beside the dead man? Yes, said Holmes. By John Underwood and Sons, 129 Camberswell Road. Gregson looked quite crestfallen. I had no idea that you noticed that, he said. Have you been there? No. Ha! Cried Gregson, in a relieved voice. You should never neglect a chance, however small it may seem. To a great mind, nothing is little, remarked Holmes, sententiously. Well, I went to Underwood and asked him if he had sold a hat of that size and description. He looked over his books and came on it at once. He had sent the hat to a Mr. Dreadbird residing at Carpenter's boarding establishment, Dorkay Terrace. Thus I got his address. Smart, very smart, murmured Sherlock Holmes. I next called upon Madame Carpenter, continued the detective. I found her very pale and distressed. Her daughter was in the room, too, and uncommonly fine girl she is, too. She was looking red about the eyes, and her lips trembled as I spoke to her. That didn't escape my notice. I began to smell a rat. You know that feeling, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, when you come upon the right scent? A kind of thrill in your nerves. Have you heard of the mysterious death of your late boarder, Mr. Rock J. Drebber of Cleveland? I asked. The mother nodded. She didn't seem able to get out a word. The daughter burst into tears. I felt more than ever that these people knew something of the matter. At what o'clock did Mr. Drebber leave your house for the train? I asked. At 8 o'clock, she said, gulping in her throat to keep down her agitation. His secretary, Mr. Strangerson, said that there were 2 trains, one at 9:15 and the one at 11. He was to catch the first. And was that the last which you saw of him? A terrible change came over the woman's face as I asked the question. Her features turned perfectly livid. It was some seconds before she could get out the single word, yes. And when it did come, it was in a husky, unnatural tone. There was a silence for a moment, and then the daughter spoke in a calm, clever voice. No good can ever come of falsehood, mother, she said. Let us be frank with this gentleman. We did see Mr. Drebber again. God forgive you, said Madame Carpenter, throwing up her arms and sinking back in her chair. You have murdered your brother. Arthur would rather that we spoke the truth, the girl answered firmly. You had best tell me all about it now, I said. Half confidence are worse than none. Besides, you do not know how much we know of it. On your head be it, Alice, cried her mother, and then turning to me. I will tell you all, sir. Do not imagine that my agitation on behalf of my son arises from any fears lest he should have had a hand in this terrible affair. He is utterly innocent of it. My dread is, however, that in your eyes and the eyes of others he may appear to be compromised. That, however, is surely impossible. His high character, his profession, his descendants would all forbid it. Your best way is to make a clean breast of the facts, I answered. Depend upon it, if your son is innocent, he will be none the worse. Perhaps, Alice, you had better leave us together, she said, and her daughter withdrew. Now, sir, she continued, I had no intention of telling you all this, but since my poor daughter has disclosed it, I have no alternative. Having once decided to speak, I will tell you all without omitting any particular. It is your wisest course, said I. Why, Mr. Dreadbird has been with us nearly 3 weeks. He and his secretary, Mr. Strangerson, have been traveling on the continent. I noticed a Copenhagen label upon each of his trunks, showing that he had been their last shopping place. Strangerson was a quiet, reserved man, but his employer, I am sorry to say, was far otherwise. He was coarse in his habits and brutish in his ways. The very night of his arrival, he became very much the worse for drink, and indeed, after 12 o'clock in the day, he could hardly ever be said to be sober. His manners towards the maid servants were disgustingly free and familiar. Worst of all, he speedily assumes the same attitude towards my daughter Alice. I spoke to her more than once in a way which, fortunately, she is too innocent to understand. On one occasion, he actually seized her in his arms and embraced her. In outrage, which caused his own secretary to approach him for his unmanly conduct. "But why did you stand all this?" I asked. "I suppose that you can get rid of your boarders when you wish." Madame Comerford blushed at my pertinent question. Would to God that I had given him notice on the very day that he came, she said. But it was a sore temptation that we're paying £1 a day each, £14 a week. And this is the slack season. I am a widow, and my baby's in the Navy. Has cost me much. I grudged to lose the money. I acted for the best. This last was too much, however, and I gave him notice to leave an account of it. And that was the reason of his goings. Well, my heart grew light when I saw him drive away. My son is on leave just now, but I did not tell him anything of all this, for his temper is violent, and he is passionately fond of his sister. When I closed the door behind him, a load seemed to be lifted from my mind. Alas, in less than an hour, there was a ring at the bell, and I learned that Mr. Drebber had returned. He was much excited and evidently the worse for drink. He forced his way into the room where I was sitting with my daughter and made some incoherent remarks about having missed the train. He then turned to Alice and before a very fade proposed to her that she could fly with him. "You are of age," he said, "and there is no law to stop you. I have enough money. I have money enough and to spare. Never mind the old girl here, but come along with me now, straight away. You shall live like a princess." Poor Alice was so frightened that she shrunk away from him, but he caught her by the wrist, and he vowed to draw her towards the door. I screamed, and at that moment my son Arthur came into the room. What happened then, I do not know. I heard oaths and the confused sounds of a scuffle. I was too terrified to raise my head. When I did look up, I saw Arthur standing in the doorway laughing, with a stick in his hand. "I don't think that fine fellow will trouble us again," he said. I'll just go after him and see what he does with himself." Those words, he took his hat and started off down the street. The next morning we heard of Mr. Drebber's mysterious death. This statement came from Madame Comerford's lips, with many gasps and pauses. At times she spoke so low that I could hardly catch the words. I made shorthand notes of it that she said, however, so that there should be no possibility of a mistake. "It's quite exciting," said Sherlock Holmes, with a yawn. "What happened next?" When Madame Comerford paused, the detective continued, I saw that the whole case hung upon one point. Fixing her with my eyes in a way which I always found effective with women, I asked her at what hour her son returns. "I do not know," she answered. "Not know?" "No. He has a latchkey, and he lets himself in." "After you went to bed?" "Yes." "When did you go to bed?" "About 11. "So your son was gone at least 2 hours?" "Yes." "Possibly 4 or 5. "Yes." "What was he doing during that time?" "I don't know," she answered, turning white to her very lips. Of course, after that, there was nothing more to be done. I found out where Lieutenant Carpenter was, took 2 officers with me, and arrested him. When I touched him on the shoulder and warned him to come quietly with us, he answered, as bold as brass, "I suppose you arrest me for being concerned in the death of the scoundrel Drebber," he said. We had said nothing to him about it, so that this alluding to it had a most suspicious aspect. "Very," said Holmes. He still carried that heavy stick which the mother described him as having with him when he followed Drebber. It was a short oak cudgel. "What is your theory then?" "Well, my theory is that he followed Drebber as far as the Brixton Road. When there, a fresh altercation arose between them, in the course of which Drebber received a blow from the stick, in the pit of the stomach, perhaps, which killed him without leaving any marks. The night was so wet that no one was about, so Christopher dragged the body of his victim into the empty house. As to the candle, and the blood, and the writing on the wall, and the ring, they may all be so many tricks to throw the police onto the wrong scent. Well done, said Holmes in an encouraging voice. Really, Gregson, you are getting along. We shall make something of you yet. I find myself that I have managed it rather neatly, the detective answered proudly. The young man volunteered a statement in which he said that after following Drebber sometime, the latter received him and took a cab in order to get away from him. On his way home, he met an old shipmate that took a long walk with him. On being asked where his old shipmate lived, he was unable to give any satisfactory reply. I think the whole case fits together uncommonly well. What amuses me is to think that Lestrade, who had started off upon the wrong scent, I'm afraid he won't make much of it. Why, by Jove, there's the very man himself. There was indeed Lestrade, who had ascended the stairs while we were talking, and who now entered the room. The assurance and genuineness which gently marked his demeanor and dress were, however, wanting. His face was disturbed and troubled, while his clothes were disarrayed and untidy. He had evidently came with the intention of consulting with Sherlock Holmes, for on perceiving his colleague, he appeared to be embarrassed and put out. He stood in the center of the room, fumbling nervously with his hat and uncertain what to do. This is the most extraordinary case, he said at last, a most incomprehensible affair. Ah, you found it so, Mr. Lestrade, cried Gregson triumphantly. And you would come to that conclusion. Have you managed to find the secretary, Mr. Joseph Stangerson? The secretary, Mr. Joseph Stangerson, said Lestrade gravely, was murdered at Hillsday Private Hotel about 6 o'clock this morning. Light in the darkness. The intelligence with which Lestrade greeted us was so momentous and so unexpected that we were all three fairly dumbfounded. Gregson sprung out of his chair and upset the remainder of his whiskey and water. I stared in silence at Sherlock Holmes, whose lips were compressed and his brows drawn down over his eyes. Stangerson too? He murdered? The plot thickens. It was quite thick enough before, bubbled Lestrade, taking a seat. I seem to have dropped into a sort of council of war. Are you sure of this piece of intelligence? Stammered Gregson. I have just came from his room, said Lestrade. I was the first to discover what had occurred. We have been hearing Gregson's view of the matter, Holmes observed. Would you mind letting us know what you have seen and done? I have no objection, Lestrade answered, seating himself. I freely confess that I was of the opinion that Stangerson was concerned in the death of Drebber. The fresh development has shown me that I was completely mistaken. Full of the one idea, I set myself to find out what had become of the secretary. They had been seen together at Euston Station about 8:30 on the evening of the 3rd. At 2 in the morning, Drebber had been found in the Brixton Road. The question which confronted me was to find out how Stangerson had been employed between 8:30 and the time of the crime, and what had become of him afterwards. I telegraphed to Liverpool, giving a description of the man and warning them to keep a watch upon the American boats. I then set to work calling upon all the hotels and lodging houses in the vicinity of Euston. You see, I argued that if Drebber and his companion had become separated. The natural course for the latter would be to put up somewhere in the vicinity for the night, and then to hang about the station again next morning. They would be likely to agree on some meeting place beforehand, remarked Holmes. So it proved. They spent the whole of yesterday evening in making inquiries entirely without avail. This morning I began very early, and at 8 o'clock I reached Holiday Private Hotel in the Little George Street. On my inquiry as to whether a Mr. Strangerson was living there, they at once answered me in an affirmative. No doubt you are the gentleman whom he was expecting, they said. He has been waiting for a gentleman for 2 days. And where is he now? I asked. He is upstairs in bed. He wished to be called at 9. I will go up and see him at once, I said. It seemed to me that my sudden appearance might shake his nerves and led him to say something unguarded. The boots volunteered to show me to the room. It was on the 2nd floor, and there was a small corridor leading up to it. The boots pointed out to the door to me. I was about to go downstairs again when I saw something that made me feel sickening, in spite of my 20 years' experience. From under the door, there curled a little red ribbon of blood, which had meandered across the passage and formed a little pool along the skirting at the other side. I gave a cry, which brought the boots back. He nearly fainted when he saw it. The door was locked on the inside, but we put our shoulders to it and knocked it in. And kicked it in. The window of the room was open, and besides the window, all hurled up, lay the body of a man in his nightdress. He was quite dead, and had been for some time, for his limbs were rigid and cold. When we turned him over, the boots recognized him at once as being the same gentleman who had engaged the room under the name of Joseph Strangerson. The cause of death was a deep stab in the left side, which must have penetrated the heart. And now comes the strange part of the affair. What do you suppose was above the murdered man? I felt a creeping of the flesh and a presentiment of coming horror, even before Sherlock Holmes answered. The word Ratchy written in letters of blood, he said. That was it, said Lestrade in awe-struck voice, and we were all silent for a while. There was something so methodical and so incomprehensible about the deeds of this unknown assassin that imparted a fresh gatling to his case. My nerves, which were steadily enough on the field of battle, tangled as I thought of it. The man was seen, continued Lestrade, a milk boy passing on his way to the dairy, happened to walk down the lane which leads from the mews at the back of the hotel. He noticed that a ladder, which usually is there, was raised against one of the windows of the 2nd floor, which was wide open. After passing, he looked back and saw a man descend the ladder. He came down so quietly and openly that the boy imagined him to be some carpenter or joiner at work in the hotel. He took no particular notice of him, beyond thinking in his own mind that it was early for him to be at work. He has an impression that the man was tall, had a reddish face, and was dressed in a long brownish coat. And he must have stayed in the room some time little after the murder, for we found blood-stained water in the basin, where he had washed his hands, and marks on the street where he had deliberately wiped his knife. I glanced at Holmes on hearing the description of the murderer, which tallied so exactly with his own. There was, however, no trace of the exultation or the satisfaction upon his face. Did you find nothing in the room which could furnish a clue to the murderer? He asked. Nothing. Strangerson had Gerber's purse in his pocket, but it seemed that this was usual, as he did all the paying. There was 80-odd pounds in it, but nothing had been taken. Whatever the motives of these extraordinary crimes, robbery is certainly not one of them. There were no papers or memoranda in the murdered man's pocket, except a single telegram dated from Lieberland about a month ago, and containing the words J.H. is in Europe. There was no name appended to this message. And there was nothing else? Holmes asked. And nothing of any importance. The man's novel, with which he had read himself to sleep, was laying upon the bed, and his pipe was on a chair beside him. There was a glass of water on the table, and on the windowsill a small chip ointment box containing a couple pills. Sherlock Holmes sprang from his chair with an exclamation of delight. "The last link!" he cried. Exultanary? My case is complete. The two detectives stared at him in amusement. I have now in my hand, my companion said confidently, all the threads which have formed such a tangle. There are of course details to be filled in, but I am as certain of all the main facts from the time that Mr. Drebber parted from Strangerson's at the station up until the discovery of the body of the latter, as if I had seen them with my own eyes. I will give you a proof of my knowledge. Could you lay your hands upon those pills? I have them, Mr. Lestrange, producing a small white box. I took them in purse and a telegram, intending to have them put in the place of safety at the police station. And it was the merest chance my taking these pills, for I am bound to say I do not attach any importance to them. Give them here, said Holmes. Now, doctor, turning to me, are those ordinary pills? They certainly were not. They were of a purely gray color, small, round, and almost transparent against the light. From their lightness and transparency, I would imagine they are soluble in water, I remarked. Precisely so, answered Holmes. Now, would you mind going down and fetching the poor little devil of a terrier, which had been in bed so long, and which the landlady wanted you to put out of its pain yesterday? I went downstairs and carried the dog upstairs in my arms. Its labored breathing and glazing eyes showed that it was not far from its end. Indeed, its snow-white muzzle proclaimed that it had already exceeded the usual term of canine existence. I placed it upon a cushion on the rug. I will now cut one of these pills in two, said Holmes, and drawing his penknife, he suited the action to the words. One half we would return into the box for future purposes. The other half I will place in this wineglass, in which, in a teaspoon of water, you perceive that our friend the doctor is right, and that it readily dissolves. This may be very interesting, said Lestrade, in the injured tone of one who suspects that he is being laughed at. I cannot say, however, what it has to do with the death of Mr. Joseph Strangerson. Patience, my friend, patience. You'll find in time that it has everything to do with it. I shall now add a little milk to make the mixture palatable, and on presenting it to the dog we find that he laps it up readily enough. As he spoke, he turned the contents of the wineglass into a saucer and placed it in front of the terrier, who speedily licked it dry. Sherlock Holmes earnest demeanor had so far convinced us that we all sat in silence, watching the little animal intently, and expecting some startling effect. None such appeared, however. The dog continued to lie, stretched upon the cushion, breathing in a labored way, but apparently neither the better nor the worse for its draught. Holmes had taken out his watch, and as minutes followed minutes without result, an expression of the utmost chagrin and disappointment appeared upon his features. He ground his lips, drumming his fingers upon the table, and showed every other synonym of acute impatience. So great was his emotion that I felt sincerely sorry for him, while the two detectives smiled devilishly, by no means displeased at this check which he had made. "It can't be a coincidence," he cried, at last springing from the chair and pacing wildly up and down the room. "It is impossible that it should be a mere coincidence. The very pills which I suspect in the case of Trevor are actually found after the death of Strangerson, and yet they are inert. What can it mean? Surely my whole chain of reasoning cannot have been false. It is impossible, and yet this wretched dog is none the worse. Ah, I have it! With a perfect shriek of delight, he rushed to the box, put the other pills in two, dissolved it, added milk, and presented it to the terrier. The unfortunate creature's tongue seemed hardly to have been moistened in it before it gave a convulsive shiver in every limb, and lay as rigid and lifeless as if it had been struck by lightning. Sherlock Holmes drew a long breath and wiped the perspiration from his forehead. "I should have more faith," he said. "I have to know by this time that when a fact appears to be opposed to a long trade of deduction, it invariably proved to be capable of bearing some other interpretation. Of the two pills in the box, one was of the most deadly poison and the other was entirely harmless. I ought to have known that before ever I saw the box at all." The last statement appeared to me to be so startling that I could hardly believe that he was in his sober state. There was the dead dog, however, to prove that his conjecture had been correct. It seemed to me that the mists in my own mind were gradually clearing away, and I began to have a dim, vague perception of the truth. "Well, this seems strange to you," continued Holmes, "because you failed at the beginning of the inquiry to grasp the importance of the single real clue which was presented to you. I had the good fortune to seize upon that, and everything which has occurred since then has served to confirm my original supposition, and indeed was the logical sequence of it. Instincts which have perplexed you and made the case more obscure have served to enlighten me and to straighten my conclusions. It is a mistake to confound strangers with mystery, the most commonplace crime often the most mysterious, because it presents no new or special features from which deduction may be drawn. This murderer would have been infinitely more difficult to unravel had the body of the victim been simply found laying in the roadway without any of those artery and the sensational accomplishments which have rendered it remarkable. These strange details, far from making the case more difficult, have really had the effect of making it less so." Mr. Gregson, who had listened to this address with considerable impatience, but contained himself no longer. "Look here, Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he said, "we are all ready to acknowledge that you are a smart man and that you have your own methods of working. We want something more than mere theory and preaching now, though. It is a case of taking the man. I have made my case out, and it seems I was wrong. Young Carpenter could not have been engaged in the second affair. Lestrade went after this man, Strangerson, and it appeared that he was wrong too. You have thrown out hints here and hints there, and seem to know more than we do. But the time has come when we feel that we have a right to ask you straight how much you do know of the business. Can you name the man who did it?" "I cannot help feeling that Gregson is right, sir," remarked Lestrade. We have both tried and we have both failed. You have remarked more than once since I have been in the room that you had all the evidence which you required. Surely you will not withhold it any longer. Any delay in arresting the assassin, I observed, might give him time to perpetrate some fresh atrocity. Thus pressed by us all, Holmes showed sign of irresolution. He continued to walk up and down the room with his head sunk on his chest and his brows drawn down, as was his habit when lost in thought. There will be no more murderers, he said at last, stopping abruptly and facing us. You can put that consideration ahead of the question. You have asked me if I know the name of the assassin, and I do. The mere knowledge of his name is a small thing, however, compared with the power of laying our hands upon him. This I expect very shortly to do. I have good hopes of managing it through my own arrangements, but it is a thing which needs delicate handling, for we have a shrewd and desperate man to deal with, who is supported, as I have had occasion to prove, by another who is as clever as himself. As long as this man has no idea that anyone can have a clue, there is some chance of securing him. But if he had the slightest suspicion, he would change his name and vanish in an instant among the 4 million inhabitants of this great city. Without meaning to hurt either your feelings, I am bound to say that I consider these men to be more than a match for the official force, and that it is why I have not asked for your assistance. If I fail, I shall of course incur all the blame due to this omission, but that I am prepared for. At present, I am ready to promise that the instant that I can communicate with you without endangering my own combination, I shall do so. Gregson and Lestrade seemed to be far from satisfied by this assurance, or by the depreciating allusion to the detective force. The former had flushed up to the roots of his flaxen hair, while the other's beady eyes glistened with curiosity and resentment. Neither of them had time to speak, however, before there was a tap at the door, and the spokesman of the street, Arb's young Wiggins, introduced his insignificant, unsavory person. Please, sir, he said, touching his forelock. I have the cab downstairs. Good boy, said Holmes, blandly. Why don't you introduce this pattern at Scotland Yard? He continued, taking a pair of steel handcuffs from a drawer. See how beautifully the spring works. They fasten in an instant. The old pattern is good enough, remarked Lestrade, if we can only find the man to put them on. Very good, said Holmes, smiling. The cabman may as well help me with my boxes. Just ask him to step up, Wiggins. I was surprised to find my companion speaking as though we were about to set out on a journey, since he had not said anything to me about it. There was a small portmanteau in the room, and this he pulled out and began to strap. He was busily engaged at it when the cabman entered the room. Just give me a help with this buckle, cabman, he said, kneeling over his task and never turning his head. The fellow came forward with a somewhat sullen, defiant air, and put down his hands to assist. At that instant, there was a sharp click, the jangling of metal, and Sherlock Holmes sprung to his feet again. Gentlemen, he cried, with flashing eyes, get me introducing you to Mr. Jefferson Hope, the murderer of Rush Drebber and of Joseph Stangerson. The whole thing occurred in an instant so quickly that I had no time to realize it. I had a vivid recollection of that instant, of Holmes' triumphant expression, and the ring in his voice, of the cameraman's dazed, savage face, and as he glanced at the glistening handcuffs, which had appeared as if by magic upon his wrist. For a second or two we might have been a group of statues. Then, with an inadequate roar of fury, the prisoner wrenched himself free from Holmes' grasp, and hurled himself through the window. The woodwork and glass gave way before him, but before he got quite through, Gregson and Lestrade and Holmes sprung upon him like so many stagehounds. He was dragged back into the room, and then commenced a A terrific conflict, so powerful and so fierce was he that the four of us were shaken off again and again. He appeared to have the convulsion strength of a man in an apoplectic fit. His face and hands were terribly mangled by his passage through the glass. But loss of blood had no effect in diminishing his resistance. It was not until Lestrade succeeded in getting his hand inside the neck cloth and half strangling him that we made him realize that his struggle was of no avail. And even then, we felt no security until we had positioned his feet as well as his hands. That done, we rose to our feet, breathless and panting. "We have his cab," said Sherlock Holmes. "It will serve to take him to Scotland Yard. And now, gentlemen," he continued with a pleasant smile, "we have reached the end of our little mystery. You are very welcome to put any questions that you like to me now, and there is no danger that I will refuse to answer them."